So we spent some time talking about grief and grief recovery and the mother wounds that you have experienced and the fact that through dealing with your own losses, your own grief, that you found a sense of joy by really facing the pain of your past as it relates to your mother and the wounds that you carry. How do you think those wounds that you carried from your mother impacted your athletic life? Because to be a two-time Olympian uh, and carrying those wounds, what was that like for you?
Wow. Um, my you'll often hear me refer to my 10-year-old self. So again, that's the most pivotal time in my life because that's when my mother actually left home.
Okay.
And so as a 10-year-old, I had the body of an athlete, but I wasn't an athlete then, and I didn't know what an athlete was.
Hmm.
And all I knew, my security blanket was gone. I'm starting high school. I have this body that I completely despise. Um, and my home life is just chaotic. My father was there, but he wasn't there. He's there physically sometimes, but certainly wasn't plugged in. So here I am at 10, fathering two younger siblings, two brothers who are 8 and 6. And I developed this, well, I guess because of fear, anxiety, unsure. I developed this kind of controlling thing where, I'm trying to make sure that I don't drop the ball and my siblings are taken care of and I'm okay. And, you know, when your parent is gone, especially when they've never been gone before, my body was at home 24/7. And all of a sudden she's gone. And I have to put context because most people, when I mention that, they go, why don't you just call her? Why don't you just go visit her? No, no phone, no cell phone, no car. You know what I mean? Like, oh,
Well, and you're 10 years old,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so you're 10. You have, I think I heard you say two younger siblings.
Sibling.
And so for a 10-year-old to care for two younger siblings in a household where daddy is emotionally unavailable, that's a lot. Even if you could call her,
Exactly.
that's a lot for a 10-year-old to absorb.
Yes. Yeah.
So
And it was. And I I began to turn to myself, let's just say, because I mean, I have no outlet. So I think I experienced a period of depression during that time in my, early.
did you know it was depression?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, this is a culture where nobody talks about emotions or anything.
So where are you from?
Jamaica.
Jamaica.
Yes. Yes.
So Jamaica culture don't really talk about depression or anxiety or stress, but I think in general, Black Americans don't spend enough time talking about depression and anxiety and stress. And this month is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I don't know any better thing we can talk about really on a regular basis is how we manage or even eliminate our anxiety and our stress, right? Through faith and action.
Yes.
Faith and works.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So we cannot or we should not avoid these conversations, right? So as a 10-year-old, you have signs of depression, fear, anxiety, all wrapped up with being a 10-year-old who's taking care of two smaller siblings
Yes.
and no one to talk to
No.
about it.
And so it's about anything.
And you're carrying that for years,
What I carried for years, I become controlling. I become just just lost in myself. And just I guess maybe I don't know if I was angry. I don't think I felt angry. I was just in survival mode.
right?
And athletics found me in high school because I went to high school at 10. And it started very organically. I mean, we grew up poor. We didn't have camps or anything like that. So I never knew anything about track. We had one TV channel. So I never watched anything regarding sports. And, just my parents knew nothing about sports either. But I was always just a hyperactive child. That's basically it. But my first year in high school, I was discovered to be the best long jumper. And didn't know what long jumping was, but I was challenged. If I jumped whoever jumped the farthest would win an American candy bar. So
yes, that's an inspiration.
it really was, because we did not have those candy in Jamaica, and so I wanted, and that's literally what started that next journey of my life. And so, but again, it did not heal the turmoil that was feeling on the inside.
Yeah, it masked. Yeah, it masks. And so, that's not really that unusual for us to mask our pain. We call that stirs, if you remember.
Yes.
We call those stirs in grief recovery.
Yes.
It's a way, the stirs a short-term energy releasing behavior, right? Let me define that. And so it is a way to mask or distract us from the emotional pain that we're feeling. And so we never actually deal with the source of our pain. And so for Diane at 10 years old, until she discovered the grief recovery program and completed it, she was masking, would that be fair to say?
Oh, yeah.
She was masking the pain of the mother wound, the feeling of abandonment, raising 2 children as a 10-year-old, right? So to mask that, it's heavy.
It's very heavy. It's that very heavy. And then I even ended up taking on the extra burden of, eventually I left, well, my younger sibling had left to go live with my mother at some point, but I left a sibling that followed me at home when I migrated to the United States on a track scholarship. And so there was that. I mean, obviously it was not my responsibility, but it was. And it's for a time that I had to then give him a second level of abandonment by leaving him. And it's only been in recent years that I've discovered he ended up having an ulcer at 21.
Wow.
So that same stress and anxiety that I dealt with, he also dealt with it.
Yeah, and what do we learn about grief, trauma, anxiety, stress that we carry in our bodies? And really what happened for generations is that same depression and grief and anxiety, it gets passed on to the next generation, right? Until it goes disrupted.
Yes.
And so until that disruption occurs, when we recognize that we're passing on these anxiety and stress to our siblings, to our husbands, to our entire generation sometimes, because we refuse to do the necessary work to become emotionally healthy, right? So faith and works. Works is an internal process, but it also helps us from an external place. And so we carry the grief and the trauma with us, and then we transfer all of that grief and trauma to the next generation. Quite frankly, that's why I started this work, right? I wanted to disrupt the path, right?
Yeah.
Of the misunderstanding and the misinformation that I've been taught all my life about what grief is.
Yeah.
Grief is a normal and natural response to significant loss of any kind.
Yes.
It's not just about death. It's not just about divorce. It's about the feeling of abandonment or being abandoned as a young child. That's grief. That's significant emotional changes in your life. And so grief is about losing a job or a house or a car or your kids going off to school. Any significant emotional changes that occur in your life has grief, the emotions of grief, wrapped up inside of that.
Yeah. And I cannot tell you how many people I have shared that with since working with you, because I was recently talking to someone who, again, was constantly being moved from place to place. Yeah. And every time they formed friendships with, their schoolmates or whatever, because of poverty and the mother having to move to wherever she could get an apartment, the number of schools that they moved to.
Yeah.
Also, which then caused them not to be able to really connect because it's new people all the time. And I said, that's great. And they were like, no, that's not. And I said, yeah, no, so I've had to share that. And I think the biggest thing I have taken away to one of the things I've taken away so many things, we have to normalize this conversation about our emotion and what we've been through, majority of them starting in our family's origin.
Yes.
And so, you had asked me about how that helped me into my track career. I now know that God always had a plan for my life.
Oh, yeah.
So that body that I so despised, and I look back through a journal that I have and how I describe myself, saying there was no use for a body like mine, because I was short, I had muscles, I didn't look like any of my peers, and because of what was going on at home, I hated my body. I just felt like this outcast that had no value. And then I didn't have a mother to go say XYZ to. So it was really rough.
Yeah.
But all along, God knew that there was something called athletics and
Oh, yeah.
all that. But I didn't. So,
I'm just crazy enough to believe that God uses everything in us.
everything.
Nothing is wasted. And so we've talked about the impact of the absent mom and the emotional, unavailable father that's in the house. We've talked about grief as a significant loss of any kind, not just death and divorce. We've identified that at a very young age, you suffer from depression, stress, and anxiety because you had poor body image, right? Yes. And so when we look at our current society, right, we have young women that are experiencing the very same thing based on different areas in their own lives, right? It may not be from abandonment, but we sure are seeing an onslaught of poor self-esteem in our young Black women at a very much earlier age than ever before.